Hello, dear friends. Welcome back to our channel. Today we have an extremely interesting story waiting for you to discover. Prepare a comfortable seat and a cup of hot tea. Let's start the journey right now. After serving a 5-year prison sentence, Daniel decided to visit the grave of his late girlfriend, Emily. As he leaned over her tombstone, his face turned pale at what he saw. A light drizzle fell on the muddy ground as Daniel trudged through the cemetery. The chilly air carried the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil and damp leaves, but he barely noticed. Each step felt heavy, guided by a mix of sorrow and guilt. This was his first chance to confront what remained of Emily, a grave, a headstone, and the unbearable burden of regret he had carried since that tragic night. When he reached her grave, a shiver ran through him. The headstone was simple, its white marble lettering stark and timeless. Daniel knelt, his fingers brushing the cold stone, his eyes fixed on the inscription. But suddenly, he froze. Something didn't add up. The dates carved into the stone were wrong. They suggested Emily had died before the accident that had sent him to prison. Confused, he ran his fingers over the engraving, as though the tactile connection could erase what his eyes were seeing. A suffocating unease replaced the grief he had expected to feel. Daniel stood abruptly, scanning the cemetery as though the answers might lie hidden in the eerie silence. He turned toward the small caretaker's shed near the cemetery entrance. Inside, an elderly man sat hunched over a table, absorbed in a crackling radio. "Excuse me, sir," Daniel began, his voice tight with unease. "I need some information. How long has the headstone for Emily Johnson been here?" The caretaker raised tired eyes and asked, "Which headstone?" in a disinterested tone. "Emily Johnson's," Daniel replied, his voice faltering. "She was buried here." The old man frowned, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "There's no Emily Johnson buried here," he said with certainty. Daniel blinked, stunned. "That can't be right. I just saw her headstone. It's right there." He pointed to where he had been moments before. The caretaker shook his head. "Let me check," he said, pulling out a dusty notebook filled with yellowed pages. After flipping through the records, the man looked up and confirmed, "There's no Emily Johnson in this cemetery. Never was." The caretaker's words hit Daniel like a punch. He stammered, trying to describe the headstone he had just visited, but the caretaker's response didn't change. Desperation clawed at his chest. If Emily wasn't buried there, then where was she? And why would someone erect a false headstone? Returning to the grave, his mind raced with questions. Who had done this? And why? Then, a frightening yet exhilarating thought struck him. What if Emily was still alive? The idea seemed absurd, yet it ignited a glimmer of hope. Leaving the cemetery, Daniel clenched his fists, trying to control the emotional storm inside him. He had no answers, only the certainty that something was terribly wrong. Whatever the truth was, he had to uncover it. After a sleepless night of wrestling with his doubts, Daniel couldn't shake the tormenting thought that Emily might still be alive. The following morning, he made a decision. If anyone could help him uncover the truth, it was Michael, his childhood best friend, who was now a police officer. Despite the years and distance between them, Daniel believed he could rely on him. Walking through the bustling streets of the city, Daniel felt disconnected from the world around him. The contrast between the noise outside and the chaos in his mind left him dazed. When he arrived at the police station, he hesitated before the glass doors. Memories of his own arrest and trial resurfaced, making it hard to step inside. But he steeled himself and entered. Michael sat at his desk, his uniform pristine as he focused on a computer screen. When he looked up and saw Daniel, his expression shifted, a mix of surprise and concern washing over his face. A mix of surprise and apprehension flashed across Michael's face as he stood, adjusting his belt. Daniel, he said, walking over to him. I didn't expect to see you so soon. How are you? Daniel replied with a weary half-smile. I've been better. I need your help, Michael. Something very strange is happening. Michael gestured for him to sit in the chair by his desk. What happened? Daniel quickly recounted his visit to the cemetery, describing Emily's headstone and the lack of records of her burial. As he spoke, Michael's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Are you sure about this? Michael asked, leaning forward. Absolutely, Daniel said firmly. I need to know what really happened. Something is wrong. None of this makes sense. Michael hesitated, clearly torn. He knew getting involved could risk his career, especially if it meant crossing someone as powerful as Robert Johnson. But the determination in Daniel's eyes moved him. All right, Daniel, Michael finally said. I'll help you, but we have to be careful. We're dealing with influential people, and I can't take risks without solid evidence. They started by analyzing the accident records through Michael's access to the police database. At first, everything seemed ordinary. The report detailed Emily Johnson's death in a car accident. But as Michael cross-referenced the data with other files, inconsistencies emerged. The death certificate, which should have contained precise details about Emily, was oddly generic and confusing. Even more shocking, a secondary report identified the accident victim as someone else entirely. A woman named Mary, with a different age and background. This doesn't add up, Michael said, frowning at the files. Here, it says the victim was Mary, not Emily. But the death certificate was issued in Emily's name. It's like someone intentionally swapped their identities. Daniel's stomach churned. Are you saying Emily didn't die in that accident? Michael looked at him gravely. All indications are that it wasn't her. And if that's true, someone went to great lengths to hide what really happened. The weight of the revelation hung heavy between them. Michael understood the risks, but couldn't abandon his friend now. I'll keep investigating, Daniel, but you need to prepare yourself. This is bigger than an identity mix-up. If Robert Johnson is involved, there's a lot more at play. Daniel nodded, the enormity of the situation pressing down on him. But for the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope. He wasn't alone. Michael was by his side, and together, they would uncover the truth. Daniel wandered the city streets like a ghost, searching for answers in places that had once been refuges of happiness. Every corner seemed haunted by memories of Emily, her laughter, her gaze, now distant and dreamlike. To uncover the truth, he knew he'd have to revisit the past, no matter how painful it was. His first stop was the small cafe where they had spent countless afternoons. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee hit him as he entered, but the atmosphere felt hollow. The furniture was the same, but the warmth was gone. He tried to get information from the staff, but no one remembered Emily. Time had moved on, leaving her memory behind. After leaving the cafe, Daniel went to the central square where he and Emily had often strolled at dusk. He lingered near the wooden benches, watching the trees sway in the wind. Then, he noticed a man sitting in a shadowed corner, his face partially hidden beneath a cap. Something about him felt familiar. Cautiously, Daniel approached. "Excuse me," he began, his voice hesitant. "You're Charles, aren't you?" The man slowly lifted his head, revealing a face etched with age and disillusionment. It was Charles, a former employee of the Johnson family who had vanished from the city years ago. "Daniel," Charles said, his voice rough with surprise. "I can't believe it. You're out." "I am," Daniel replied, "and I need answers. You worked for Robert Johnson?" "Charles, tell me what happened to Emily," Daniel demanded, his voice taut with urgency. Charles glanced around nervously, as if ensuring no one was eavesdropping, before motioning for Daniel to sit beside him. "Listen, kid," Charles began, his voice low. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but," he paused, taking a deep breath. Robert sent Emily away after the accident. She was alive, but he forced her to move to another city, far from everyone. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. Why? Why would he do that? Charles hesitated, then finally murmured, because she was pregnant, and Robert would never accept his daughter having a child of her own. He thought it would ruin the family's reputation. The ground seemed to shift beneath Daniel. Emily was pregnant. He had a child. The revelation hit him like a tidal wave, and suddenly, everything started to fall into place. A far darker scheme than he'd imagined. Do you know where she is now? Where Robert sent her? Daniel asked, gripping Charles's arm tightly. I don't know, Charles admitted. All I know is that he used powerful connections to hide her. After that, I left the job. I couldn't be part of it anymore. Charles stood, his expression grim. If you're planning to go after Robert Johnson, be careful. He's dangerous. He's already ruined your life once, and he won't hesitate to do it again. Daniel remained frozen in the square, Charles's words echoing in his mind. The mystery had grown even darker, but now he had something he hadn't had before. A new reason to fight. If Emily was alive, he would find her. If he had a child, he would meet them. Determination ignited in his chest, a fire no one could extinguish. Whatever awaited him, he was ready to face it. The dirt road wound through desolate hills, flanked by tall trees that cast dense shadows under the pale moonlight. Daniel drove in silence, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. Beside him, Michael studied a hastily drawn map lit by the dim glow of his phone screen. They were heading to a remote property, one of Robert Johnson's many discreet holdings, hidden for years. Michael had found the location buried in old real estate records, a faint thread in the web of the Johnson family's secrets. This is it, Michael said, pointing to a rusted gate barely visible in the darkness. Daniel parked the car and stepped out, his pulse racing. He pushed the gate open, its hinges groaning in protest. They followed a narrow path that led to a modest house, run down and shrouded in isolation. It was far from luxurious, yet it bore the telltale signs of intentional seclusion. Are you sure about this? Daniel asked, glancing at Michael. There's no other explanation, Michael replied firmly. Everything points to this place. Daniel approached the front door and turned the knob. It was unlocked. He pushed it open cautiously, greeted by the smell of mildew and aged wood. The interior was dim, lit only by faint moonlight filtering through a cracked window. The house appeared abandoned, yet every corner seemed heavy with untold secrets. Let's search, Michael said, pulling out a flashlight. They began combing through the house. Dusty sheets covered the furniture, and the silence was oppressive. Daniel felt as though the walls themselves were guarding the answers he sought. In a small room at the back of the house, he found something. A wooden chest secured with a simple padlock, tucked into a corner. Using a tool Michael had brought, Daniel broke the padlock. Inside, they discovered a stack of documents. Among contracts and old letters, something stood out, a bundle of handwritten notes. Daniel's heart leapt as he recognized the handwriting. With trembling hands, he picked up the first letter and began to read. The words seemed to speak directly to him, bridging the years that had separated them. Daniel, my love, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I have to believe you will. I'm being held here against my will. My father forced me to come to this place, claiming it was for my own good. I'm pregnant, Daniel. Our child is growing inside me, and he knows. He wants to erase you from my life, to erase our story. But I will never forget you. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he continued reading the letters. Each one pierced deeper into his heart, recounting Emily's isolation, her struggle to stay sane, and her unwavering love for him. She described how Robert forced her to take on a new identity to erase her existence entirely. Michael watched in silence, the weight of the words not lost on him. "She tried to reach you, Daniel," he said, his voice laced with indignation. "All of this was to separate you from her and your child." Among the documents, they found damning evidence of Robert's schemes: suspicious bank transfers, forged contracts, and explicit instructions to cover up the accident that had upended Daniel's life. It wasn't just evidence against Robert. It was a roadmap through the labyrinth of lies he had constructed. Clutching Emily's letters tightly, Daniel's chest burned with a mix of anguish and rage. The thought of Emily, alone, fighting against her father's manipulation filled him with resolve. She was alive, and he had a child. He would stop at nothing to right the wrongs. As they left the house, Michael carrying the box of documents, Daniel glanced up at the starry sky. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. Emily's letters weren't just proof of her love. They were a call to action. He would answer it, no matter the cost. The sound of tires on asphalt felt distant as Daniel drove toward the neighboring city. His heart pounded in the tense silence. Beside him, Michael flipped through the information they had uncovered once more. Emily, now living as Charlotte Morgan, was married to Victor Simmons, a respected businessman. It was a life built on lies and coercion, but she was alive. They arrived in a quiet neighborhood lined with trees and immaculate houses. Michael parked discreetly a few meters away from the address they had traced. Daniel stared at the brick house, its warm lights glowing behind drawn curtains. Shadows moved inside. "Are you ready?" Michael asked, noting Daniel's tense demeanor. "I'll never be," Daniel replied, stepping out of the car. "But I have to do this." Each step toward the front door felt heavier than the last. When he rang the doorbell, the sound seemed to reverberate in the stillness of the street. After a few moments, the door opened. There she was, Emily, or Charlotte, as she was now known. Her face was slightly different, more mature, but still unmistakable. Their eyes met, and he saw the shock ripple through her. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She glanced over her shoulder nervously, as if expecting someone to appear. "You shouldn't be here." Daniel took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "We need to talk, Emily. I can't live without understanding what happened." She hesitated before opening the door wider, motioning for him to come inside. The house was sophisticated, its modern decor exuding wealth and elegance. But to Daniel, it felt more like a gilded cage. They sat in the living room. Emily's discomfort was palpable as she avoided looking directly at him. "What do you want to know?" she finally asked. "The truth," Daniel said. "Why did you pretend to be dead? Why didn't you reach out to me? And where is our son?" The last question came out as a whisper, laden with pain. Emily buried her face in her hands, visibly shaken. "I never wanted to leave you, Daniel. My father, he forced me. After the accident, he said you were dangerous, that staying with you would put our son at risk. He made me disappear, change my name, marry Victor. Also, he could control me. And control Enzo." The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. "Enzo?" he repeated, his voice trembling. "That's his name," Emily said softly. Her words left Daniel struggling to process everything. But soon, anger bubbled to the surface. "You had a choice, Emily," he said, his voice breaking. "You could have fought for us. You knew what I was going through, what I lost. And yet, you let him destroy everything." Emily began to cry but quickly raised her head, her expression resolute. "Do you think it was easy for me? I was pregnant, alone, and terrified," Emily said, her voice shaking. "He threatened me in every way possible. He said he would take my son from me, that he would do to you what he's done to so many others who crossed him. I did what I thought I had to protect Enzo." Her words struck Daniel like a punch to the gut, but as he looked at her, his anger began to wane. He could see past his resentment to the truth. Emily had been a victim, manipulated and forced into making unbearable choices. A deep sadness replaced the fury inside him. "Enzo," Daniel said, his voice trembling, "does he know about me?" Emily shook her head. "No, he thinks Victor is his father. That was part of the condition my father imposed when he orchestrated all of this. But Enzo is yours, Daniel. He's always been yours." Tears streamed down her face as she spoke. The weight of her words crashed down on Daniel. He had a son, a boy who had no idea he existed. He closed his eyes, taking a moment to compose himself. When he opened them, the pain and resentment were still there, but so was a newfound resolve. "This has to end," he said firmly. "Your father won't control our lives anymore. He's already destroyed my past, but I won't let him destroy our future. I will fight for Enzo, for you, for everything he took from us." Emily nodded slowly, her expression one of cautious hope. It was as if, for the first time, she could see a way out. As the sun began to rise, Daniel, Emily, and Michael met in a safe place, a quiet inn on the outskirts of the city. Emily was visibly nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a folder full of documents. Helping Daniel and Michael had not been an easy decision. Betraying her father, even after everything he had done, was a burden she carried heavily. But she knew it was necessary. The truth had to come out. "This is everything I've gathered over the years," Emily said, placing the folder on the table. Forged contracts, suspicious bank transfers, names of people in his network. "My father isn't just a powerful businessman, Daniel. He's the head of a criminal scheme involving corruption, drug trafficking, and money laundering. He controls everything: local politicians, police officers, even judges." Michael flipped through the documents, his expression shifting from shock to outrage. "This is significant, but we'll need more direct evidence if we're going to make this stick. Otherwise, Robert's influence will bury it." Emily nodded. "The most important files are at the main house on the farm. That's where he keeps everything. But it's heavily guarded: cameras, security systems, armed men. It won't be easy." Daniel, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "I'll go in," he said with determination. "I've wasted too much time letting him control the narrative. If this is what we need to bring him down, I'll do it." Michael shook his head. "We can't be reckless. If we get caught, Robert won't hesitate to eliminate us. We need a solid plan." As they discussed their strategy, Emily brought up something that stopped Daniel in his tracks. "Before we move forward, you need to meet Enzo," she said softly. "He deserves to know who you are." The thought of meeting his son filled Daniel with a mix of excitement and fear. He knew Enzo had grown up believing Victor was his father. Introducing himself would shatter part of the boy's reality, but remaining a stranger was unbearable. That afternoon, Emily took Daniel to a park where Enzo often played. From a distance, Daniel saw him for the first time. A boy with messy brown hair, curious eyes, and boundless energy as he chased a ball. Daniel's heart tightened. He wanted to rush to him, embrace him, and tell him everything. But he knew he had to take things slowly. "I'll introduce you as a friend of mine," Emily explained. "It's the best way to start." Enzo ran toward them, clutching his ball. "Mommy, who's that?" he asked, pointing at Daniel. Emily smiled, though her eyes betrayed her emotions. "This is Daniel," she said, "an old friend of mine." Daniel crouched down to Enzo's eye level, his voice soft. "Hey there, champ. Do you like soccer?" Enzo's face lit up, nodding enthusiastically. "Yeah, I love it," he exclaimed, launching into a lively discussion about the games he watched on TV and his favorite moves. As Daniel listened, a lump formed in his throat. This was his son, a boy full of life, hope, and dreams. And no matter how hard it was, he would fight for him. The conversation flowed easily, and Daniel felt an immediate bond with Enzo. But he knew earning his son's trust would take time. In the days that followed, Daniel found ways to be present in Enzo's life, without revealing the truth. Their initial interactions were hesitant. Enzo was unsure about this new friend. Yet, through small, daily moments, Daniel began to bridge the gap between them. Slowly, Enzo warmed to him, admiring qualities he had never seen in Victor: sincerity and genuine attention. Meanwhile, the plan to take down Robert Johnson advanced steadily. Michael secured surveillance equipment and escape routes. Emily mapped out the layout of the farm, identifying where the critical files were stored. The atmosphere was charged with tension, but also determination. Robert always thought he was untouchable, Emily said, her voice firm. But he underestimated what we're capable of when we fight together. Daniel looked at her and Michael, realizing that, for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. This wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a battle to reclaim his life and secure his son's future. He was ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. Robert Johnson had made too many mistakes, and now he would face the consequences. The lights of Robert's farm shimmered in the darkness, concealing the brewing storm. Unbeknownst to Daniel and his allies, Robert had learned of their movements. His contacts had informed him about Michael's actions and the sensitive documents now in their possession. His anger was palpable. He needed to act quickly to protect his influence and maintain control over Emily and Enzo. The next morning, Emily received a chilling call. Robert's cold voice sent shivers down her spine. "You're playing with fire, Emily," he said, his tone deliberate. "I thought I made it clear what would happen if you betrayed my trust. Are you ready to lose Enzo? Because if you continue, he'll no longer be under your protection." Emily felt the world collapse around her. For a moment, fear paralyzed her. But then, anger took over. She had endured years of manipulation, but now she wasn't alone. With trembling hands, she hung up the phone and rushed to the inn where Daniel and Michael were staying. When she arrived, her pale face betrayed the gravity of the situation. "He knows," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father knows what we're doing. He threatened to take Enzo from me." Daniel immediately stood, his expression hard. "He won't touch our son. Not this time. Michael, we need to reinforce their security." Michael nodded, already dialing his phone. "I'll reach out to trusted officers. We can't involve everyone. Robert's influence runs deep, but there are still people on our side." While Michael coordinated protection for Emily and Enzo, Daniel stayed behind to plan their next steps. "I know you're scared, Emily," he said, his tone calm but resolute. "But we can't lose focus. He's trying to intimidate us because he knows we're close." Emily took a deep breath, determination replacing the fear in her eyes. "I won't let him win again. Enzo means everything to me, and now I know we have allies." That night, the danger escalated. Robert sent 2 henchmen to monitor Daniel and Emily's movements. Michael, who had spotted a suspicious car circling the inn, took immediate action. He and a fellow officer set up an ambush, intercepting the men before they could act. The confrontation was tense. Michael aimed his gun at the henchman, his voice firm. "Speak now, or you'll end up in a cell before dawn." One of the men, realizing there was no escape, revealed Robert's plan. He intended to take Enzo to a remote location under his control. The revelation that Robert planned to send Enzo to one of his overseas properties, far from Emily and Daniel, struck like a bombshell. Fury surged through Daniel, but he channeled it into resolve. He had to act swiftly to protect his son. The next day, while Emily and Enzo were being moved to a secure location under police protection, Daniel and Michael prepared for a direct confrontation. Through careful investigation, They learned that Robert would be at one of his corporate offices, a site frequently used for discreet meetings with his criminal associates. It was the perfect moment to expose the man who had destroyed so many lives. That night, the tension was palpable as Daniel, Michael, and two trusted officers infiltrated the office. Michael carried the incriminating evidence Emily had collected, ready to present it to the authorities. But their goal was clear. They needed to catch Robert in the act. Inside, Robert was waiting, his expression unflinching. His confidence was unshaken, even in the face of impending exposure. "So, this is it," he said with a cold, ironic smile. "You think you can take me down? You're nothing compared to what I've built." Daniel's eyes burned with determination. "Don't underestimate what a man with something to fight for can do," he replied. The confrontation escalated as Robert's henchmen attempted to block their progress. But with the help of the officers, Daniel and Michael managed to fight their way through. When Robert saw there was no escape, his facade crumbled, revealing a desperate man. "Everything I did was to protect my family, to preserve what's mine," Robert shouted, his voice reverberating through the office. "You destroyed your family, Robert." Emily's voice cut through the chaos as she entered the room, flanked by police. "And now you'll pay for it." With the evidence in hand and the police on their side, Robert was arrested on the spot. His influence, carefully built over decades, collapsed like a house of cards. As he was led away in handcuffs, he cast a venomous glare at Emily. "You'll regret this," he hissed. But Emily turned her head, refusing to let fear control her again. The fight wasn't over, but they had won a crucial battle. Daniel felt a glimmer of relief. They had struck a blow against the man who had caused so much pain. For the first time, his family felt just a little safer. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with anticipation, as the judge delivered Robert Johnson's sentence. For weeks, the prosecution had meticulously presented the evidence collected by Michael, Emily, and Daniel. It laid bare Robert's vast criminal network, exposing a web of bribery, fraudulent contracts, drug trafficking, and money laundering. "Robert Johnson," the judge declared, "you have been found guilty on multiple charges, including corruption, document forgery, and tampering with evidence. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The gavel struck with finality. Robert sat motionless, an aged, defeated man. For the first time, his mask of arrogance had fallen away. Under the weight of overwhelming evidence, he had confessed to parts of his crimes during the trial. In one moment of apparent weakness, he admitted to orchestrating the staged accident that had sent Daniel to prison. "I thought I was protecting my family," Robert said. "I manipulated the accident evidence. I made it look like Emily had died. It was easier to separate her from Daniel that way. I used another identity, created a perfect scenario. But no one died that night." He spent 5 years in prison for something that never happened. Those words echoed in Daniel's mind. For years, he had carried the guilt of a crime that had never existed. The weight of the revelation was immense, but it was also freeing. With Robert behind bars, Daniel could finally begin to heal. After the trial, Daniel and Emily took a walk through a quiet park. Free from her father's control, Emily shared the truth about her marriage to Victor. "It was all a sham," she admitted. "Victor only agreed to it because he was trapped under my father's influence, too. There was no love, just convenience. He filed for divorce after the trial." "And now?" Daniel asked, his voice hesitant. Emily gave a bittersweet smile. "Now, it's your turn to build something with Enzo. He needs you, Daniel, and you deserve this time with him." Daniel nodded, understanding the significance of her words. There was much to repair, but his priority was clear: rebuilding his relationship with his son. Though their bond was still new and uncertain, there was hope. For the first time, Daniel felt he had a chance to reclaim the life that had been stolen from him. A bond began to grow between Daniel and Enzo, fragile at first, but undeniably real. It was a connection that only time and effort could strengthen. The days that followed were focused on rebuilding. Daniel moved into a modest apartment near Enzo's school, determined to create a stable routine. He spent afternoons with the boy, playing soccer at the park or helping him with his homework. Each small step in their relationship felt like a triumph. "Daddy, can I show you something?" Enzo asked one day, holding a piece of paper in his small hands. Daniel's heart swelled every time the boy called him Daddy. He took the paper and saw a colorful drawing of a man and a boy holding a soccer ball. "Did you make this?" "It's amazing, champ," Daniel said, smiling as joy filled his heart, a happiness he hadn't felt in years. Though the journey was challenging, Daniel knew he was building something real. Emily, meanwhile, focused on rebuilding her own life. Free from her father's shadow and the choices forced upon her, she was carving out a new path. She stayed in touch with Daniel and Enzo, but gave them the space they needed to form their own bond. One sunny morning, Daniel stepped onto the balcony of his apartment and gazed at the city below. It was a new day, full of possibilities. For the first time in years, he felt his life was truly his own. The scars of the past remained, but now they were marks of survival, not defeat. Inside, he saw Enzo playing with a soccer ball in the living room. A smile spread across Daniel's face. His son was living proof that, despite the lies and pain, the truth had prevailed. Daniel didn't have all the answers, but he had something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill his lungs. The past, with all its burdens, would stay behind where it belonged. Now was the time to build a future, not just for himself, but for Enzo and the life they could share together. As the sun illuminated the horizon, Daniel realized that, for the first time, he was truly free. Thank you for watching today's story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below to share your thoughts. See you in the next video.